Hello, fourth graders. I hope you enjoyed chapter 1 of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief. Today we're going to keep going with chapter 2. But before we start, I want to announce a big congratulations to Memphis. Again, they were our winners today. They are in the lead with 2 points. That means that they have had 2 days where their class has completed the most work in Read Aloud. Way to go, Memphis. Keep it up. Santa Cruz, you were right behind them, just 1 away. And Notre Dame, I know that I'm going to see even more assignment submissions tomorrow. Or today. Thank you so much for all your hard work. If you have any questions, of course, reach out. Let's go ahead and get started with our lesson. Good readers always read the question first so that we know what to look for in the text. This is our quiz for today, Percy Jackson, Chapter 2. As always, put your name first and last. Click on your class. And we'll go ahead and read the questions together now. Read the sentence, then answer the question that follows. One of the current events we studied in social studies class was the unusual number of small planes that had gone down in sudden squalls in the Atlantic that year. Which of the following phrases from page 17 gives the best clues to the meaning of the word squalls? Choose 2. Choose 2 tells me that I need to pick 2 answers. And there's a copy of page 17 right below this question so that you can reread it if you need to. Question 2, read the following paragraph from page 37. Our rental cabin was on the South Shore, way out at the tip of Long Island. It was a little pastel box with faded curtains, half sunken into the dunes. There was always sand in the sheets and spiders in the cabinets, and most of the time the sea was too cold to swim in. In a drama, which feature would most likely present the events of the paragraph? Okay, so question number 1 is about context clues. Sometimes when we're reading, we come across words that we don't quite know. And if you don't know a word, you can use context, which is the words around it, clues to guess what the word is or make an assumption as to what the word might mean. So we're going to watch a quick video of a little comic that will give us an idea of what context clues are.
Boo! Ah! Sorry, Josh. I couldn't help myself. Josh, that can is all shaken up. It's ready to rupture, and I will not clean up your mess. Ah! I just told you it was ready to rupture. Yeah, but I don't know what that word means. Well, didn't you hear the clues in what I was saying? I told you it was all shaken up and would probably make a big mess. Those clues should have let you know that rupture means explode. Yeah, well, I guess that means you're not going to help me clean this up. You're getting smarter all the time, aren't you, little brother?
Question number 2 is about a drama. Drama is a genre of writing, or a type of writing, along with prose and poetry. After our read aloud today, we'll come back to this slide and we'll talk about drama, prose, and poetry. A few vocab words to go over before are hallucination, which is seeing something that's not really there. Perky, which means cheerful or happy. Solstice, which happens 2 times a year. There's the summer solstice and the winter solstice, which is when the sun reaches its highest or lowest point in the sky at noon, which is 12 p.m., marked by the longest and shortest days of the year. So it's a phenomenon in weather, or an event in weather, um, that happens in our solar system that leads to long or short days of the year. Resolved means finished. Ignorance means lack of knowledge. Eavesdropping, listening secretly to a conversation. This is going to be a really important part of the story, is a scene about eavesdropping. So listen up for that. Smirked, a smile where you are full of yourself. So it's like maybe you played a trick on someone, and when you trick them, you kind of smile because you knew it was going to happen already. Or it's kind of like a devious smile, or like a sneaky smile. Destined means bound to happen. Assumed means believed it to be true. And mournfully means sadly. Remember, if you see stars by the words, it means that they'll come up in other chapters too. Let's go ahead and get started with our reading of chapter 2. Remember, we left off right after Percy had fought off his teacher that maybe wasn't even a teacher at all. We're not quite sure what was happening there, but I think we'll find out more in chapters 2 and 3. So get comfortable and get ready to listen. Chapter 2. 3 old ladies knit the socks of death. I was used to the occasional weird experience, but usually they were over quickly. This 24/7 hallucination was more than I could handle. For the rest of the school year, the entire campus seemed to be playing some kind of trick on me. The students acted as if they were completely and totally convinced that Mrs. Kerr, a perky blonde woman whom I'd never seen in my life until she got on our bus at the end of the field trip, had been our pre-algebra teacher since Christmas. Every so often, I would spring a Mrs. Dodds reference on somebody just to see if I could trip them up, but they would stare at me like I was psycho. It got so I almost believed them. Mrs. Dodds had never existed. Almost. But Grover couldn't fool me. When I mentioned the name Dodds to him, he would hesitate, then claim she didn't exist. But I knew he was lying. Something was going on. Something had happened at the museum. I didn't have much time to think about it during the days, but at night, visions of Mrs. Dodds with talons and leathery wings would wake me up in a cold sweat. The freak weather continued, which didn't help my mood. One night, a thunderstorm blew out the windows in my dorm room. A few days later, the biggest tornado ever spotted in the Hudson Valley touched down only 50 miles from Yancey Academy. One of the current events we studied in social studies class was the unusual number of small planes that had gone down in sudden squalls in the Atlantic that year. Oh, I remember that from the quiz. I'm going to go back and read that sentence again. One of the current events we had studied in social studies class was the unusual number of small planes that had gone down in sudden squalls in the Atlantic that year. I started feeling cranky and irritable most of the time. My grades slipped from D's to F's. I got into more fights with Nancy Bobofit and her friends. I was sent out into the hallway in almost every class. Finally, when our English teacher, Mrs. Nicole, asked me for the millionth time why I was too lazy to study for spelling tests, I snapped. I called him an old sot. I wasn't even sure what it meant, but it sounded good. The headmaster sent my mom a letter the following week, making it official. I would not be invited back next year to Yancey Academy. Fine, I told myself, just fine. I was homesick. I wanted to be with my mom in our little apartment on the Upper East Side, even if I had to go to public school and put up with my obnoxious stepfather and his stupid poker parties. And yet, there were things I'd miss at Yancey. The view of the woods out of my dorm room, the Hudson River in the distance, the smell of pine trees. I'd miss Grover, who'd been a good friend even if he was a little strange. I worried how he'd survive next year without me. I'd miss Latin class too. Mr. Brenner's crazy tournament days and his faith that I could do well. As exam week got closer, Latin was the only test I studied for. I hadn't forgotten what Mr. Brenner had told me about the subject being life and death for me. I wasn't sure why, but I'd started to believe him. I wonder why Percy was so willing to study for Mr. Brenner's class, even though he didn't study for any of his other tests. The evening before my final, I got so frustrated, I threw the Cambridge Guide to Greek Mythology across my dorm room. Words had started swimming off the page, circling my head, the letters doing 180s as if they were riding skateboards. There was no way I was going to remember the difference between Chiron and Chiron, or polydix and polydeuces. And conjugating those Latin verbs, forget it. I paced the room, feeling like ants were crawling around inside my shirt. I remembered Mr. Brenner's serious expression, his 1,000-year-old eyes. I will accept only the best from you, Percy Jackson. I took a deep breath. I picked up the mythology book. I'd never asked a teacher for help before. Maybe if I talked to Mr. Brenner, he could give me some pointers. At least I could apologize for the big fat F I was about to score on his exam. I didn't want to leave Yancey Academy with him thinking I hadn't tried. I walked downstairs to the faculty offices. Most of them were dark and empty, but Mr. Brenner's door was ajar. Light from his window was stretching across the hallway floor. I was 3 steps from the door handle when I heard voices inside the office. Mr. Brenner asked a question. A voice that was definitely Grover's said, "Worried about Percy, sir." I froze. I'm not usually an eavesdropper, but I dare you to try not listening if you hear your best friend talking about you to an adult. I inched closer. "Alone this summer," Grover was saying. "I mean, a kindly one in the school. Now that we know for sure, and they know too." "We would only make matters worse by rushing him," Mr. Brenner said. "We need the boy to mature more." "But he may not have time. The summer solstice deadline will have to be resolved without him, Grover. Let him enjoy his ignorance while he still can." "Sir, he saw her." "His imagination," Mr. Brenner insisted. "The mist over the students and staff will be enough to convince him of that." "Sir, I can't fail in my duties again." Grover's voice was choked with emotion. "You know what that would mean." "You haven't failed, Grover," Mr. Brenner said kindly. "I should have seen her for what she was. Now let's just worry about keeping Percy alive until next fall." The mythology book dropped out of my hand and hit the floor with a thud. Mr. Brenner went silent. My heart hammering, I picked up the book and backed down the hall. A shadow slid across the lighted glass of Brenner's office door, the shadow of something much taller than my wheelchair-bound teacher, holding something that looked suspiciously like an archer's bow. I opened the nearest door and slipped inside. A few seconds later, I heard a slow clop, 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 like muffled wood blocks. Then a sound like an animal snuffling right outside my door. A large, dark shape paused in front of the glass, then moved on. A bead of sweat trickled down my neck. Somewhere in the hallway, Mr. Brenner spoke. "Nothing," he murmured. "My nerves haven't been right since the winter solstice." "Mine neither," Grover said. "But I could have sworn." "Go back to the dorm," Mr. Brenner told him. "You've got a long day of exams tomorrow." "Don't remind me." The lights went out in Mr. Brenner's office. I waited in the dark for what seemed like forever. Finally, I slipped out into the hallway and made my way back up to the dorm. Grover was lying in his bed, studying his Latin exam notes like he'd been there all night. "Hey," he said, bleary-eyed. You going to be ready for this test? I didn't answer. You look awful, he frowned. Is everything okay? Just tired. I turned so he couldn't read my expression and started getting ready for bed. I didn't understand what I had heard downstairs. I wanted to believe I'd imagined the whole thing. But one thing was clear. Grover and Mr. Brenner were talking about me behind my back. They thought that I was in some kind of danger. The next afternoon, as I was leaving the 3-hour Latin exam, my eyes swimming with all the Greek and Roman names I'd misspelled, Mr. Brenner called me back inside. For a moment, I was worried he'd found out about my eavesdropping the night before, but that didn't seem to be the problem. Percy, he said, don't be discouraged about leaving Yancey. It's for the best. His tone was kind, but the words still embarrassed me. Even though he was speaking quietly, the other kids finishing the test could hear. Nancy Bobofit smirked at me and made sarcastic little kissing motions with her lips. I mumbled, "Okay, sir." I mean, Mr. Brenner wheeled his chair back and forth like he wasn't sure what to say. This isn't the right place for you. It was only a matter of time. My eyes stung. Here was my favorite teacher in front of the class telling me I couldn't handle it. After saying he believed in me all year, now he was telling me I was destined to get kicked out. Right, I said, trembling. No, Mr. Brenner said. Oh, confound it all. What I'm trying to say. You're not normal, Percy. That's nothing to be. Thanks, I blurted out. Thanks a lot, sir, for reminding me. Percy, but I was already gone. On the last day of the term, I shoved my clothes into my suitcase. The other guys were joking around, talking about their vacation plans. One of them was going on a hiking trip to Switzerland. Another was cruising the Caribbean for a month. They were juvenile delinquents like me, but they were rich juvenile delinquents. Their daddies were executives or ambassadors or celebrities. I was a nobody, from a family of nobodies. They asked me what I'd be doing this summer, and I told them I was going back to the city. What I didn't tell them was that I'd have to get a summer job walking dogs or selling magazine subscriptions and spend my free time worrying about where I'd go to school in the fall. Oh, one of the guys said, that's cool. They went back to their conversation as if I'd never existed. The only person I dreaded saying goodbye to was Grover. But as it turned out, I didn't have to. He'd booked a ticket to Manhattan on the same Greyhound as I had, so there we were, together again, heading into the city. During the whole bus ride, Grover kept glancing nervously down the aisle, watching the other passengers. It occurred to me that he'd always acted nervous and fidgety when we left Yancey, as if he expected something bad to happen. Before, I'd always assumed he was worried about getting teased. But there was nobody to tease him on the Greyhound. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I said, "Looking for kindly ones?" Grover nearly jumped out of his seat. What do you mean? I confessed about eavesdropping on him and Mr. Brenner the night before the exam. Grover's eye twitched. How much did you hear? Oh, not much. What's the summer solstice deadline? He winced. Look, Percy, I was just worried for you, see? I mean, hallucinating about demon math teachers, Grover. And I was telling Mr. Brenner that maybe you were overstressed or something because there was no such person as Mrs. Dodds and Grover, you're a really, really bad liar. His ears turned pink. From his shirt pocket, he fished out a grubby business card. Just take this, okay, in case you need me this summer. The card was in fancy script, which was murder on my dyslexic eyes, but I finally made out something like Grover Underwood, Keeper, Half-Blood Hill, Long Island, New York. What's half? Don't say it out loud, he yelped. That's my, summer address. My heart sank. Grover had a summer home. I'd never considered that his family might be as rich as the others at Yancey. Okay, I said glumly. So, if I want to come visit your mansion, he nodded. Or if you need me. Why would I need you? It came out harsher than I meant it to. Grover blushed right down to his Adam's apple. Look, Percy, the truth is I kind of have to protect you. I stared at him. All year long, I'd gotten in fights, keeping bullies away from him. I'd lost sleep worrying that he'd get beaten up next year without me. And here he was acting like he was the one who defended me. Grover, I said, what exactly are you protecting me from? There was a huge grinding noise under our feet. Black smoke poured from the dashboard, and the whole bus filled with the smell like rotten eggs. The driver cursed and limped the Greyhound over to the side of the highway. After a few minutes clanking around in the engine compartment, the driver announced that we'd all have to get off. Grover and I filed outside with everybody else. We were on a stretch of country road, no place you'd notice if you didn't break down there. On our side of the highway was nothing but maple trees and litter from passing cars. On the other side, across 4 lanes of asphalt shimmering with afternoon heat, was an old-fashioned fruit stand. The stuff on sale looked really good. Heaping boxes of blood-red cherries and apples, walnuts and apricots, jugs of cider, and a clawfoot tub full of ice. There were no customers, just 3 old ladies sitting in rocking chairs in the shade of a maple tree, knitting the biggest pair of socks I'd ever seen. I mean, these socks were the size of sweaters, but they were clearly socks. The lady on the right knitted one of them. The lady on the left knitted the other. The lady in the middle held an enormous basket of electric blue yarn. All 3 women looked ancient, with pale faces, wrinkled like fruit leather, silver hair tied back in white bandanas, bony arms sticking out of bleached cotton dresses. The weirdest thing was they seemed to be looking right at me. I looked over at Grover to say something about this and saw that the blood had drained from his face. His nose was twitching. Grover, I said. Hey, man. Tell me they're not looking at you. They are, aren't they? Yeah, weird, huh? You think those socks would fit me? Not funny, Percy. Not funny at all. The old lady in the middle took out a huge pair of scissors, gold and silver, long-bladed like shears. I heard Grover catch his breath. We're getting on the bus, he told me. Come on. What? I said. It's 1,000 degrees in there. Come on. He pried open the door and climbed inside, but I stayed back. Across the road, the old ladies were still watching me. The middle one cut the yarn, and I swear I could hear that snip across 4 lanes of traffic. Her 2 friends balled up the electric blue socks, leaving me wondering who they could possibly be for, Sasquatch or Godzilla. At the rear of the bus, the driver wrenched a big chunk of smoking metal out of the engine compartment. The bus shuddered, and the engine roared back to life. The passengers cheered. Darn right, yelled the driver. He slapped the bus with his hat. Everybody back on board. Once we got going, I started feeling feverish, as if I'd caught the flu. Grover didn't look much better. He was shivering and his teeth were chattering. Grover? Yeah? What are you not telling me? He dabbed his forehead with his shirt sleeve. Percy, what did you see back at that fruit stand? You mean the old ladies? What is it about them, man? They're not like Mrs. Dodds, are they? His expression was hard to read, but I got the feeling that the fruit stand ladies were something much, much worse than Mrs. Dodds. He said, just tell me what you saw. The middle one took out her scissors, and she cut the yarn. He closed his eyes and made a gesture with his fingers that might have been crossing himself, but it wasn't. It was something else, something almost older. He said, you saw her snip the cord. Yeah, so? But even as I said it, I knew it was a big deal. This is not happening, Grover mumbled. He started chewing at his thumb. I don't want this to be like the last time. What last time? Always 6th grade. They never get past 6th. Grover, I said, because he was really starting to scare me. What are you talking about? Let me walk you home from the bus station. Promise me. This seemed like a strange request to me, but I promised he could. Is this like a superstition or something? I asked. No answer. Grover, that snipping of the yarn, does that mean somebody is going to die? He looked at me mournfully, like he was already picking the kind of flowers I'd like best on my coffin. Wow. Scholars, that chapter was terrifying and so full of action. I'm starting to learn more, and I'm thinking that maybe Mrs. Dodds was not a teacher, and maybe it wasn't just Percy's imagination. It sounds like something very, very strange is going on. I'm really excited to read chapter 3 and see if there's an explanation for all of this. Let's go back to this information about question number 2 before I let you go off to work on your quiz. Question number 2 is about drama. Drama is a genre or a type of writing along with prose and poetry. So Percy Jackson and the Olympians is written in prose. That means it's written in a way that tells a story with paragraphs and chapters, and it kind of tells the story the way you would tell it if you were just talking. Another genre is drama, which is like a play, and another type is poetry, which I know you're learning a lot about with Mr. U right now. We're going to watch this quick video about poetry, prose, and drama.
Each writing style has its own pros and cons. Ha, pros and cons, get it? Poetry, for instance, allows you to create something with lots of rhythm and rhyme, making it more interesting or pleasing to hear read aloud. It's also great for experimentation, since you can break up sentences into different lines to make the reader think about what you're saying in different ways. The main con of poetry is that it's not always easy to understand, and you'll find that most readers prefer easy. Which is a great pro for prose. It's straightforward and well organized. Writers can use paragraphs and chapters to further organize the action and ideas to make reading even easier. But it's not always rosy prose for prose. Ever opened a book, seen all those words, and immediately wanted to close the book again? Yeah, that's the con of prose. It can come across as a bit dull, as it has no interesting rhythm or rhyming, like a poem, and occasionally feel too long-winded. The third format, plays, can be great fun for a writer, as it allows them to write something that's meant to be performed. Writers get to explain what they want the stage to look like, how they want their characters to behave, and what they want the characters to say. It's kind of like playing dolls, but with people. The downside is that it's often hard to get across exactly how or when you want something to happen, especially when so much of it has to be done through the dialogue. This means that the writer can't be sure what they'll write will turn out how they intended it to, which isn't so great for those control freak writers.
We're going to focus in on drama today, and tomorrow we'll focus in a little bit on poetry. So I want you to imagine for a second, what would it be like if Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Lightning Thief, was written as a drama or as a play? I have here an adaptation from Rick Riordan's The Lightning Thief. This is an adaptation of chapter 1, and it's written the way it would be written if it were a play. It was written by Mary Milligan. So staging. This is the characters on stage. There's where they are on the stage at this point. It's a staging. The narrators stand behind the characters, preferably on risers. That means on something high where they're standing above the stage. It also lists out the characters. Narrator 1, Mr. Brenner. Narrator 2, Percy Jackson. Narrator 3, Nancy Bobbitt. Narrator 4, Mrs. Dodds. And narrator 5, Grover. And you'll see here that in a play, it's written all through dialogue. the only words we hear when we're reading or listening to or watching a play are people speaking, or sometimes a narrator kind of setting the scene for us. So you'll notice in this first line, the narrator says, "This scene from Rick Riordan's The Lightning Thief is taken from Chapter 1, I Accidentally Vaporized My Pre-Algebra Teacher. Percy Jackson is a 12-year-old boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York." So the narrator is there to set the scene and to give us some background information. And then you'll notice that Percy Jackson and Mrs. Dodds and Grover and all the different characters have pieces of dialogue throughout. When you're watching a play, they don't really have to describe the setting, because if you are watching a play, you'll be able to see the setting through like the props or the buildings that they're using and so on. So you won't see as many descriptions from the narrator about like what the setting looks like. That will be given to you through the stage settings. And the story, again, will be told through dialogue and through the characters' body language and their actions and how they interact with each other. Now, I'm going to go back up to the top and I'm going to scroll through this very slowly. I'm not going to read it aloud, but I'm going to leave it on the video here for you in case maybe you want to read it yourself, or you want to grab a family member to read it with you, or you could even put on your own Percy Jackson play. Again, this is an adaptation of Chapter 1. Okay, you can pause the video here and read what you see on the screen if you'd like. When you finish, you can press play and you'll see me scroll to the next section. Again, you can pause the video here and read what you see on the screen. Pause and press play again whenever you finish. You'll notice here that the narrators have to tell us a lot about what's happening in the characters' actions or in the setting. But if we were watching the play, they would probably say less, because we would be able to see these things happening. Again, remember to pause it if you need to keep reading, and then just press play when you get to the bottom of the screen. Awesome. So that is what Chapter 1 might look like if it were written as a drama instead of prose. Tomorrow, we'll take a look at what Percy Jackson and the Olympians might look like if it were written as poetry. Now, after the video, you're going to go to Google Classroom and complete the assignment that says Percy Jackson Chapter 2. But I have got a challenge for you. If you don't feel like doing that quiz today and you'd like a challenge or something different, what you can do is rewrite a scene from Chapter 2 as a drama. This is completely optional. This is not required. You can totally just go and do the quiz, and that is perfectly fine. But if you take on this challenge, you do not have to do the quiz. The way you can share it is by either writing it on paper and having your parents take a picture and send it to us, or you can write it on a Google Doc and share that with your teacher. So again, if you do this challenge, you can skip the quiz. If you decide not to do the challenge, that's totally a-okay. You can find the quiz in the Google Drive. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and reach out if you have any questions.